Well, there you had it. You know that sound. If you're a University of Southern California Trojan marching band member, you would know that Dr. Arthur C. Bartner would be leading you during that fight song. And we want to say thank you to everybody for tuning in today. This is 100 Yards of Football. I'm Harper LeBel. And the show is Take 5 with Steven Travers. And Steven, today, we're going to bring on an old friend, a special guest. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. And Steven, when you go back into the memory banks, you know, when you were just a young, spry Ute, if you will, you know, if you're going to go with Joe Pesci, there are certain guys that you connect with and are friends for life. And I appreciate you bringing Phil on. Phil Smith, former pitcher at USC, had a great career with the Los Angeles Police Department. We're going to talk about a lot of that and the early days of Phil athletics and at Canyon High School, just north of Los Angeles in the Newhall Canyon Country area. But first and foremost, Steven, welcome. And thank you for bringing Phil on today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harper. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to bring in to Take 5 with Steven Travers, my friend Phil Smith. Phil is a member of the famed Smith brothers, who are legends in that part of the country, Canyon Country. Phil is a member of the famed Smith brothers, who are really kind of legends in the high school and sports area and Canyon Country, which is that area by Magic Mountain. Back in the day when Phil was growing up there in the 1970s, it was kind of, you know, chaparral country, horse country. Nowadays, it's really a thriving, burgeoning suburb. But I met Phil at the University of Southern California. He had an older brother, Dave, who was an outstanding first baseman and hitter at USC. He had another brother, Keith, who signed with the New York Yankees and made it all the way to the major leagues with the Yankees. And then there was Phil. Phil was a football star and baseball star at Canyon High School in Canyon Country. And he went to USC, originally started as a third baseman, but he was also a pitcher, and eventually Coach Rod Dato switched him over to pitching. And this is where I got to meet him. Of course, I had been in the professional ranks, and I was just going to school. But Phil and I became very good friends. He was an outstanding pitcher there. And then later, we both were coached the junior varsity team known as the Spartans, when Terry Marks was also one of the coaches on that staff. And so we just go back a long, long time, Phil Smith and I. He pitched for the Trojans. He pitched for the North Pole Knicks in the Alaskan Collegiate Summer League. His coach there was Mike Gillespie, who later was a longtime star coach for the Trojans. His catcher with the Knicks was a kid from my high school, Chad Kruder, who had a long career in the major leagues with the Los Angeles Dodgers. I see Phil there. Phil, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I had to.
You can hear me. Harper,
get back in.
Harper, can you say?
Well, Phil, we're on right now. So first and foremost, welcome to the show. We appreciate your patience and all the technical problems that have been going on. And we're talking a little bit about your background. Being from Canyon Country, Phil, when you born and raised in that area, just Newhall, so to speak, just north of Los Angeles?
I was born in Inglewood, grew up in Hawthorne. Inglewood was the only hospital back in the early 60s. So, but yeah, I moved to Santa Clarita, Canyon Country area when I was about 5 or 6. So I pretty much spent my whole youth, everything in Santa Clarita.
Well, Steven talked a little bit about your brothers. Talk a little bit about the early days with you and either playing wiffle ball or, paddle tennis. There's all kinds of different things that you might have been a part of, but obviously baseball was an important part of your life. When did that begin for you?
So I had I call it a luxury. I had the luxury of having a brother that was 10 months older than I was. And then the next brother was about a year older than him. So we were bam, 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 3 in a row. And so when my oldest brother, Dave, started playing Little League, my brother Keith, who was a year younger, wasn't eligible yet. So, we went to all the practices. So I was fielding, I was hitting, I was playing baseball before I was old enough to play organized baseball. But we grew up in a very simple time in Santa Clarita where it was baseball during baseball season, basketball during basketball season, and football during football season. And we played all three sports all the way going into high school. And then my oldest brother Dave and I played football and baseball. And my
Oh, we froze up on him. Stephen, just like so many, Phil had the opportunity, not only with close family, but just the ability to have multiple sports that you can work on. You have, you may not be a great basketball player, but the team needs you. You have the ability to play some football and learn how that goes. Phil, you back with us?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we lost you there for a split second.
Yeah.
You said going into the high school area, all three sports, right? That was, did you run track or do anything else other than
No.
quote unquote the big three?
So I quit playing basketball in high school. I wanted to concentrate on football and baseball. And, my older brother Dave was an All-American in football in high school, got a full ride to USC, and came in right after the 1978 national championship.
Wow.
So he came in 79. So they had 12 players drafted from that 78 team. They were incredible. So
Yep.
He split a little time with a junior college transfer the first month. And then the junior college guy got hurt, and my brother ended up starting and was a 4-year starter there at first base. And so my middle brother Keith had scholarships coming at him from Stanford, UCLA, SC. He was a slick fielding shortstop, had a little bit of pop, and he ended up signing out of high school and playing with the Yankees. And he made it up to the big leagues in 84 and 85 briefly, but didn't stick. But he had a 17-year professional baseball career. And then I was an all-league, first team football player, all CIF first team baseball player, but I was a third baseman. And I pitched a little bit. So I went to SC as a third baseman. I started my sophomore year as a third baseman for the first month. And I was pretty much a ham and egg, for a major Division I school. I was pretty average. So we had a couple pitchers come up with injuries, and it just so happened that I basically moved from third base to pitcher in one game, and I was throwing against Arizona State, who was number 1 in the country.
Wow.
And I did really well and never played third, never sniffed the infield ever again. I was on the mound.
We'll talk a little bit about that lineup too, because Jack Del Rio was on that. Was Munoz still playing? Was he on that
No.
team at all? But Randy Johnson.
78 was his last year. So we had some pretty stellar multi-sport guys, as well as some guys who ended up having some great major league careers. So Jack Del Rio was my catcher. I was a pitcher. And Mark McGuire was a year behind me. So he was there 3 years. I played with him all 3 years that he was there. We had Jeff Brown, who was a middle linebacker, starting middle linebacker on the football team, signed, played a little bit of minor league baseball. So he was a heck of a ball player. Randy Johnson was 2 years behind me. So he was kind of our number 4 starter and kind of a long reliever. But in the Pac-10 in those days, it was a 3-game series. So he was not one of our top 3 starters. And then he ended up, after my senior year, the next year he was a starter and pitched very well, and obviously had a 23-year major league career. So, he's unbelievable. A great teammate. He was starting to put it together, but he had a ways to go while at SC.
Well, too bad you didn't mention anybody that we would know, or that went on even in other sports. Like Jack had a great NFL career, and obviously with coaching and defensive coordination, he's still a part of the National Football League. It's amazing run and great guy. I got to ask you though, Phil, what was the first time that you were called Tiger? How long did it take before you were called Tiger?
Well, because my brother Dave was already there for 2 years by the time I got there, I was Little Smitty and I was Tiger before I stepped foot on campus.
Okay.
Because I was always around as much as I could be, to watch them play. So when I stepped on the field officially as a freshman, I was Tiger right away, day one. And he would call me Smitty sometimes, but most of the time, like everyone else, it was Tiger.
The recruiting process itself, was it easier or more difficult because you had two older brothers that kind of led the way for you? What was it like for you specifically?
Well, I had a unique way of doing things. My brother Dave, God bless him, was not an academic person at all. So when he got a scholarship offer, they did whatever they had to do to get him admitted, and he was admitted. I was a little more forward thinking. I applied to one school, and that was USC. And I did that during football season because, you had to have applications in by November or so. So about January or February, I got a letter that I was accepted. And, I had a high GPA and playing sports and all that. So I got in. So when SC came through with an offer, they said, hey, we got to expedite. We got to get you going. We got to get you applied. And I said, I've already been accepted. And they almost fell out of their chairs. They couldn't believe it. Yeah. And that was the only school I applied to. I was pretty naive. I thought, okay, I'm a little better in school than my brother Dave, and he got in. So it should be no problem just to apply.
Yeah,
absolutely. A little bit naive.
Did you turn other schools down? Did Fullerton and UCLA, was Stanford and maybe Arizona State, were they all interested as well? But you just said, I don't want to go there?
I wasn't heavily recruited. Even though I was a first team All-CIF guy, I was telling them that I was going to SC. And I was going to go there by hook or by crook. And, it just so happened everything fell into place. I had a great senior year. And, so I really didn't have an open ear toward any of those that called. I did talk to Gary Adams at UCLA. And I remember telling him that, my brother Dave was at SC and he knew obviously who Dave was. So he kind of wrote me off. And Glenn Mickens, the pitching coach, he had heard of me because very uniquely, I told my baseball coach in high school, I can't pitch. I got my shot at college and pro baseball is as a third baseman. And I was the only sophomore on the varsity with my two brothers. We were 3/4 of the infield at Canyon. So I ended up, my coach comes up to me first game of CIF and says, you're starting as a pitcher. I pitched like 15 innings the whole year. And I went out and I threw like a 2-hitter against Inglewood High. And, so I pitched a little during the CIF playoffs. We made it to the semifinals. And so I think SC always knew I could pitch a little bit, but I went there as a third baseman.
Was that your position of choice? Would you have moved around had it not been for your brothers? Would you have wanted to play first or in the outfield or behind the plate? Is there any other position that you secretly loved and wished you would have played, or were you just stuck there in the corner?
I like the hot corner. And, again, when we started Little League, when I was finally old enough, we had a thing called the brothers option. So we all got to play on the same team. So Dave was a lefty. So he played first. Keith was a slick fielding shortstop. So he was a catcher and a shortstop. So by default, that was my position. I had never played any other position in the infield in any organized game until SC my freshman year. Jeff Brown and I, the football player, we were the only freshmen that played any varsity ball at all. We got brought up toward the end of the year. I think I played 7 innings, and my first 2 innings were at second base. I was petrified. I had never seen a ball hit to that side of the infield where I was there to field it. And it was a harrowing experience. And then, the next year, my sophomore year, Marty Wilkerson was our starting third baseman. He had signed, and he was like a 3-year starter. So third was open. So that's where I was. And I really wasn't equipped to play short. I wasn't that slick fielding of a player and quick like my brother Keith was. So third was a little better suited for me, and I'd never played the outfield. So yeah, I didn't think of really another position.
Phil, you got to take me back just a little bit. You had mentioned some Little League stuff a few moments ago, and then high school, of course. What was it like in the Smith house? What was Mrs. Smith, your mother, trying to keep the refrigerator full, especially when you brought friends over? I mean, I can't imagine how much Wonder Bread you guys must have gone through during a normal course of a week. The food bill must have been astronomical, especially, like I said, when friends come over.
Well, Keith and I were moderate eaters compared to Dave. Dave, when they weren't looking, would steal our food, and he was tough enough to do that, and we couldn't put up much of a fight. But my dad got laid off of the aerospace industry in the early 70s. We had been to the moon. He got laid off, and four mouths to feed. So he started our one of our Little League coaches drove a catering truck and said, "There's an opening." My dad started driving a catering truck, so he learned to bring food home. You know, the food that didn't sell or whatever, and my mom would repurpose it, and we always had food on the table. That was one thing, and we were pretty healthy eaters. We were all pretty good-sized kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to Dad for doing what it took to, feed his boys and provide for his family. But a lot of friends. I mean, was there always a game in the Smith backyard or in the driveway?
Oh, we lived on a cul-de-sac, and we pretty much owned that cul-de-sac growing up. All the kids similar in age would come out, and we would play, our version of touch football, which usually ended up me being knocked up over the hood of a car that was parked. It was pretty rough with the way we were as kids, but we always were playing we lived about 100 yards from our elementary school. So we joined the boys club. So we traveled in the boys club van. It was the boys club back then, Boys and Girls Club now. We would travel to the other Santa Clarita boys clubs and play whatever sport was in season. So we were going every single day, all day long until, as Steve knows, growing up in that era, until the lights went on and it was dark. And then we knew it was come home, eat, and, hang out for a little while and do it again the next day.
Yeah, you used to having moms with the triangle that they would raise if it were on the front porch, but the usual signal is that when the street lights come on, and that's usually when we had double overtime and the world championship was on the line. You had to play a few more minutes to get it in.
Yeah, we got in a little trouble here and there for being a little late, but the game was more important, so we would take the punishment.
Yeah. More important than going home, eating, and doing your homework. Were there other aspects of your life, Phil? You mentioned you were good in school. Were the arts and sciences, were you a music guy? Was there anything else outside of sports that you were interested in back then?
Well, it's funny that my freshman year, I got A's and B's. My sophomore year, I met my wife, and we were, the only way I could see her during the week was if we were studying, doing homework. I hated homework. I was a procrastinator. I was a crammer, and I was just smart enough to get by cramming the night before. But now I'm walking in taking tests where I've studied a few days just because I wanted to see my girlfriend. And so my sophomore, junior, and senior years, I got straight A's.
Oh, how about that?
So I ended up having a high GPA, and that's what helped me, obviously, to get into SC and stuff. So I was pretty solid in the sciences, and I wasn't real great in math, unfortunately. And usually math and science guys go hand in hand, but I didn't have the aptitude for the math. So I was an algebra guy and pretty much checked out after that.
Let me jump in here for a sec, Harper. Let me make note of a couple of things. First of all, you're talking about you started off, Phil, as a third baseman. There were a lot of position changes at SC during that time. A fellow named Mark McGuire started off as a pitcher / third baseman, and he ended up becoming a first baseman. You started off as a third baseman and became a pitcher, and eventually our friend Craig Stevenson became the third baseman. And you were also mentioning some of the great athletes who were at USC. We talked about McGuire, Randy Johnson. The pitching coach was a guy named Bill Bordley, who was as good a college pitcher as ever lived, and he was the pitching coach at USC. So
Right.
that was really quite an amazing time. But you always told me a story, and I want you to tell this story now, of the first time you were being recruited. You were at Dado Field, and you run across, Harper asked about him earlier, Anthony Munoz, and you know the story. Why don't you take it from there?
Well, most of that is true. Actually, my brother Dave was being recruited. I was with Dave because remember, Anthony ended in '78, his playing career. But when I met him, I was with my brother. We met the team bus there at Dado Field. They parked in the parking lot, and they were just coming back from a road trip or a game. And so the first guy off the bus was Anthony Munoz, and my brother and I looked up at him, and he looked like just a mountain of a man. And I was so intimidated because I thought every SC baseball player was that size. And it was just, we were in awe of him. And I didn't really know at that point in time about his ability as a football player. Obviously, Hall of Famer, he was that good. So I was a little nervous until I started going to the games the next year when my brother was playing, and I saw, okay, they have some normal sized guys too. I could kind of fit in a little bit. Although on our pitching staff, I was 6'2", and I was one of the shorter guys. I mean, they had some guys 6'4", 6'5", and then of course Randy Johnson completely upset the height average there at 6'10".
The athletic ability of the Trojan baseball team was absolutely unbelievable. We talk about Anthony Munoz, but Jack Del Rio, Jeff Brown. And the size of these guys, Big Mac, McGuire, and Randy Johnson, was really quite amazing how large these guys were. But there was a particular teammate. He was one of my best friends, and he was your teammate. And he was a really good pitcher, and he was a character. And one of these days, I'm going to do a whole show just about him. Or I've even thought about writing a book, because he's like one of these figures in life that you come across, and he's just different from anybody you've ever known. And his name was Mickey Meister. And he was, I'll give you, I'll tee it off. Mickey was my high school teammate, and he was probably considered one of the very best high school pitchers in the nation coming out of high school. And he was about your age, maybe a year older. And he comes to USC he had been recruited by Rod Dado as a sophomore. When he was a sophomore, he was getting a full ride. And there were actually two of my teammates, Jimmy Connor and Mickey Meister, both at USC. I got absolutely no love. I was the guy who wanted to be a Trojan more than anything. And I have to go to Santa Monica Junior College. Mickey and Jim Connor get full rides to USC. But it's not that I'm thinking about that at all, this part of my life. But anyway, so Mickey comes into SC, and he had a very good sophomore year. He was really the ace pitcher there, but a bit of a disappointment for various reasons. Why don't you tell us about what this guy was all about? His size, his attitude, his cocky attitude, his sense of humor. There were so many things, and his pitching ability. Just give us an all-around view of your memories of Mickey Meister.
Yeah, Mickey was a character. He was, if you didn't know him, you'd say he was cocky, he was arrogant, and he was, I think the story he related that he was the player of the decade or something up there in Northern California. He's 6'4", probably 225, 230 pounds, threw hard, had that cocky arrogance on the mound that could be intimidating to, lesser hitters. And he had, according to Mickey, the year before I met him, he pitched at Oral Roberts, and it was like 20 degrees. And he said his arm was never the same. So the arm I saw was a pretty live, pretty good arm, but according to him, it wasn't even half of what it was when he was healthy. And he never quite recovered from that. And he kind of, was relegated to the bullpen. And he didn't quite have the bite on his slider that he had. He didn't quite have the, that extra 4 or 5 miles an hour that kind of jumped out of his hand and took off at the hitters. So he still had the same cockiness. That never changed. The first time I had a road trip up north, we were playing Cal Berkeley. We stopped at a place. It was like the Steak and Stein or something like that. And if you ordered a steak, you got free beer, and it was like, Meisterbrow or some cheap stuff. And Mickey, had a little bit of money. His parents had some money, so he tells the lady, I don't want that. I want Heineken. And the waitress, he says, if you see that glass half full, you failed me. I want a new Heineken whenever you see it hit half. And I just went, wow, how brash and brazen this guy is. He was a piece of work, but he was a great teammate, just a sensational pitcher until arm injuries derailed him. And he still signed professionally, even with a bad arm. And I know he toiled a little bit, didn't play a lot of minor league ball before he was done. But, just a great teammate and a great guy and a huge loss, rest in peace, because he's been gone for a while now.
Yeah. Mickey had an ability, which is a rare ability, which is he had the ability to joke about you and make you the butt of a joke and have people laughing at you and sort of corner you. And yet somehow you would smile because you would think it was funny, because he had a way of doing it where it was not malicious. It was just a sense of humor. He'd call you meat, or he'd say, what in the world, or whatever, all these different expressions that SC baseball players had. And, if you were playing cards with them and you were slow in the draw, or you were falling behind in how much beer you were drinking, or just whatever, he was going to be on you. And how long did Dave know him enough to sort of warn you about him, or how quickly did you sort of decipher that this guy is, even though he's really cocky and arrogant, it's not a malicious kind of attitude?
My brother knew him and had played with him and was there with him at Oral Roberts when he came up a little bit with a sore arm. And so my brother talked about Mickey's ability, but not much about his personality. I think my brother's thought was, you need to find that out on your own. And it didn't take long. You really, and I think you'll get it more than anyone because you knew him, you felt honored to be embarrassed by him. You would be the butt of his joke, but you'd feel honored about being the butt of his joke. He just had that kind of way. He was a guy that should have transitioned to sales in some form or fashion, and he would have been a multimillionaire with his gift of gab. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I can remember women embarrassing Mickey about various things and saying things in front of his friends. And these were, they would say something to him that would kind of buckle people, like, I don't have any comeback. It didn't faze him in the slightest. Big smile on his face, some sort of retort, some sort of comment, and everybody's laughing, and Mickey is somehow still holding court, and he's the king of the court. Yeah, he was a character that I had known since he was 14 years old. My dad coached him, and we had incredible memories. And it was a great thing for me to come to USC after a couple of years in the pros. I still needed a couple of years to graduate. And Mickey introduced me to everybody. He introduced me to you, and actually I met Terry Marks on my own, but introduced me to almost every player on the team, Albie Silvera and Jack Del Rio and Jeff Brown and Craig Stevenson and all these different guys who are to this day some of my best friends. And I really kind of owe that to Mickey. He brought me in, like, this is Steve Travers. He was a good pitcher in high school. He and I were, the twin, they called us the Twin Towers. We won, championships together. He played pros. And so, oh yeah, okay. So, I would immediately be accepted. Yeah. There was also a left-handed pitcher. There were some real characters on that team, Phil. There was a guy named Bob Gunnarsson. He was left-handed. He had tools. He wasn't real big, but he threw pretty hard. He had a nice curveball and a slider. And he was very effective. And he would do this thing called the spider. And I don't know how he was able to do it, but he would sort of be in a squat, but his arms would be under his legs. So it would be his feet and his hands would be used to propel his body in an up and down motion around the bar at the 502 Club. The spider, and a few drinks.
So
spider. We'd all wanted spider, and boom, we got the spider. What a character Bob Gunnarsson was.
Bob Gunnarsson, for those obviously that don't know him, was kind of like a Ron Guidry, kind of thin and sinewy, very strong, no body fat. He was probably, I don't know, maybe 5'9", 5'10" at the most. But he had a sneaky fast fastball, and he threw in the high, 80s, like 88, 89, 90. But again, the ball kind of snuck up on the hitters. He had a great breaking ball. He was our number 2 starter, for a couple years. But he would grab one of the poles in the dugout, and he would hold on to it with his arms and stretch his legs out parallel to the ground. Now, the body strength it takes to do that, none of us could do. And then he would wave his legs like the breeze was, and he called it the flag. The flag, here's the flag, and his legs would be moving like a flag in the breeze. Then he would hop down, and this is where he fine-tuned his spider and some of the other stuff. He would go down onto his hands, his legs would be up in the air, and he would be on it, jumping around on 2 hands that would support his entire body. And he would lean left, lean right. And he would say, deke left, deke right. And then he would pounce forward and say, gotcha. And it just, who can do that? I mean, it's one of those, you'd have to see it to believe it, but that's the kind of strength he had. And, he was a comic. He was an absolute comic entertainer. And it just really kept the bullpen loose, kept the dugout loose. He was a good ragger back when you could rag on the other team. He threw it out with the best of them. They have an anti-ragging rule now. You can't do it, but the Trojans were well known. And what people didn't know is when I started learning to rag, it was Rod Dato that would feed you the lines to say. And here's the ultimate diplomat of baseball, both, collegiately, USA wise, internationally. And he's the one feeding you these just deprecating lines against the other team that would make, you just be, the players would just put their heads down out on the field when you were ragging on them. And they knew not to look in, because the second they peeked in, you just hit them with a barrage of rabbit, you're a rabbit, rabbiters. And that was all Rod's doing. It was a way to take the team that you're playing against off the game and off what they should be concentrating on. And it was very effective.
Well, our mutual friend Bill Spaceman Lee once called him the what did he call him? The something of Bovard, the Wizard of Bovard, or something like that, because he played at Bovard Field before Dato Field. And he would say that Rod would know in the 3rd inning what was going to happen in the 8th inning. Did you get that sense that he just had seen so much baseball and was so aware of every nuance of the game that he just understood when your team was going to make a rally, when their starting pitcher was going to wear out, when their other coach was going to pull somebody from the game that was a key guy that was going to open up the possibility for the Trojans. What was your impression of that?
So Rod, he wore number 1, and so we all called him number 1. That was kind of our nickname for him. And he was a guy that obviously was a stellar recruiter. Obviously in, the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, they didn't have the scholarship limitations we had. So, he was able to recruit some of the best and finest athletes, in and out of Southern California. And, his situational awareness of where the game was going, he was always a step or two ahead of what we were seeing out there on the field. And we weren't forward thinking. We lived for the pitch and the moment. And, if you stuck around him long enough, you started to see things were strategic. But one of his best attributes that I saw personally was he made you feel like a winner. You could be down by 7 runs in the 8th inning, and he says, we got them right where we want them. And sure as hell, we'd scratch back and take the lead, and the game was over, and we were victorious. And he made you a believer, had you believing in. And he said things like, take someone that we all know, Terry Francona, played at the University of Arizona, one of the best college hitters ever in the game. Dave, my brother Dave told me stories of, he had a line drive at Gerald Price playing second base. He jumped in the air and it went right by his glove, and it rode right out of the stadium for a home run. He had that kind of a bat. When have you ever seen or heard of that? And Rod would be in a meeting before the game with the pitchers, and he'd say, Francona, Tigers, he's a very confused hitter. And we're like, confused? Yeah, he doesn't know if he's going to hit a double off the right center wall, the left center wall, or hit it out, or, maim an infielder. That's how confused he was. So, but, he had a way of just making you feel like you were bigger and better, and you were a winner.
Yeah, the term that Bill had used was the Houdini of Bovard. But you mentioned the University of Arizona, and Terry Francona had won the Golden Spikes Award, I believe, in 1980 at U of A. So it's 1983, and you had made the switch from third base, and maybe you'd pitched a game or two, but now you've got your opportunity, the big game. It's at Dato Field. It's on a Saturday, and it's against the University of Arizona Wildcats. They were very strong, and you get out there and you throw like a 2-hit shutout with maybe 85 pitches, complete game, absolutely just completely destroyed whatever timing those guys had. You had a nice little fastball, but you had off speed. You had a slider. You were just ahead of everybody. What was going on that day? Was that just one of those days where everything falls into place and you fall into a sort of a rhythm? Did you know early that you were going to pitch that well?
So, again, it was a unique situation that brought me to the mound. You had mentioned Craig Stevenson was our shortstop. He had a thigh injury. So they moved me to the mound against Arizona State, and they shifted him over to third base so he wouldn't have to put so much, pressure on an injured quad muscle or thigh muscle, whatever it was. So I had thrown in 1982, and I went in against Arizona at Arizona. I'm the closer at that time, right? And I was, never had failed, was doing very well. And Bob Gunnarsson comes up with an arm injury in the second inning with bases loaded. And I'm out there, waiting for the 7th or 8th inning, and Dato calls for the right-hander for me to come in. And it's an injury, so take as many pitches as you need. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's the third inning. So bases loaded. And guess who's up? Their cleanup hitter. So I go in, and it's ball 1, ball 2, ball 3. I got a 3-0 count on their cleanup hitter. And I throw a strike, he takes it. I throw a strike, he fouls it off. and I throw a ballsy 3-2 curveball for a comebacker to the plate to first for a double play. Next guy comes up, curveball, pops it up to the infield, shut him down, no runs. We were up 2-1 at the time. I go out in the fourth, I go out in the fifth, and I think I'm done. And he says, "How you feel, Tiger?" I said, "I feel pretty good, Coach. Can you give me one more inning?" Yeah, I go out in the sixth. I come in. "How do you feel, Tiger?" I feel good, Coach. I go out in the seventh, the eighth, and the ninth. I shut him out the entire rest of the game, and we beat him 4-1. So I was our stopper, closer, whatever you called it back in the day. And so now it's 1983, and I'm doing a lot of relieving, getting some saves, stuff like that. And all of a sudden, the Friday game, they'll post the who's pitching and who's doing the chart and who's doing the book. The book, the scorebook was done by the pitcher who threw last, the guy not likely to throw. The chart was done by the guy who's starting the next game. My name's on there to do the chart. I was very confused, but I was afraid to ask Rod, what the deal was. So I had it in my mind, hey, there's a possibility I might start, but I've never started a game. So, and we're right in the heat of the Pac-10 play. So sure as hell, I come in the next day. I'm there as a starting pitcher. I'm warming up. I'm like, okay. And I went out and ended up throwing a 2-hit shutout all 9 innings. And the only 2 guys that got hits got singles, and they were both future major leaguers. And that was Jack Howell, who played third base with the Angels, and Ed Vosberg, who was a pitcher with the Padres, but he was their DH. He was their best hitter.
He was a good hitter.
They hit a single, and then I had a line drive comebacker and got a double play and got out of that inning. That was the 8th inning, and finished him off in the 9th. So, yeah, I would say it was like, my statistically a 2-hit shutout, the best game I ever threw there. I had some pretty good games, but that was my most memorable game, and it was my first start.
Okay, and before we hand it back off to Harper, there's one last question. This is about Rod Dado. Rod had a beach house at Seal Beach, and he would invite you guys down there. I don't know whether it was the end of the season or before beginning of the season, I'm not sure. But he also had a boat, and he would put you guys on the boat, and the boat would ride down the Orange County coast all the way to Newport. And I'm told I guess this has happened before you were there because he was gone by this time. But they would go by John Wayne's house. "Duke, how you doing? It's us, the Trojans. Come on by, fellas. How you doing?" And he would go, "Everybody loves the Trojans." Newport Beach is really Trojan country. Did you ever have those experiences? Did you ever go out on the boat, or what was that like down at Seal Beach?
So I went down there probably 3 or 4 times. He would do one kind of at the end of the year, certainly, but sometimes in the off season or at the very beginning of the season, we would go down there, and it was I think it was called Surfside, and he had right on the beach, right on the water. He had a I guess it was a small house or condominium or whatever they were. Yeah, it was a house. They were single family dwelling. And we'd hang out on the beach, and we're 18, 19, 20, 21. We're strapping youth. So we got a lot of attention there from the ladies, and that was all well and good. And he would have a big, like a steak fry, and we just had a great time. And I remember one time I had to use the bathroom, and I saw him and said, "Hey, Coach, can I go in and use the bathroom?" And guys were going in and out of the place. He said, "Smitty, Tiger, go ahead, go down across the street to my other house and use the bathroom there." And I went in there, and it was like a museum. He had bats, balls, trophies, all kinds of stuff, and literally the places were maybe 50 yards apart. But he was a pretty wealthy guy.
And he had a lot of Japanese baseball
Yes.
memorabilia too, correct?
He did, absolutely. First time I'd ever seen it. It was very ornate, very neat stuff. And I think I came back about 45 minutes later, and that's why he sent me as what he would call a salty veteran. Hey, salty vet, go use the other bathroom. He wanted me to tour the place and check it out. But yeah, we got in the boat. We go up and down the coast. John Wayne was long gone, but we did a little water skiing behind the boat. Wasn't really a ski boat, but we made it work. It was good times.
You mentioned a lot earlier that Dado would say some things that would get you guys to get kind of fired up to talk a little bit to the other team and all that. That to me is a strategy aspect. You just mentioned some of the fun things that were a part of being a Trojan. What are some of the things that you learned as a pitcher, that game experience and, you know, winning at the Pac-10 level that helped you be a better pitcher, a better player? Were there some certain things that you go in from high school and go, I think I got it, but it's a different level? What were some of the things that impressed you in terms of how you learned to pitch better?
Think about the high school days. The coach would run his hand across his chest, and that was the indicator. And then if he touched the elbow, it was bunt. If he touched the bill of his hat, it was steal. That kind of stuff. Very simplistic. So when I got to SC, all I knew was a catcher would throw down a 1, a 2, or a 3, and I would shake them off and throw what I wanted, or agree with them and throw what they wanted. And so you get there, and now you have a lot of coaches calling pitches. Rod didn't do that. He empowered the catchers to call a game. And when I started, there was a catcher, Jim Cicchini, and he played some minor league ball. Great receiver, good hitter, and he called a great game. So very seldom did I override what he called. And you were just in capable hands, and that gave you confidence. One thing I learned as a pitcher is if you don't have confidence in that pitch you're about to throw, it's not going to end well for you. And you have to believe in what you're doing. And when I stepped up there and the first time against Arizona State, and I remember Mike Pagel, their quarterback, was the runner on second. There was one out, and I think Alvin Davis was up, and then a guy named Chris Johnston was their DH, and then Kevin Romines was after that, and I did very well. But I learned to not fear the hitter, but respect him. And when I had that respect, I knew that I couldn't make a mistake. If I made a mistake, I was going to pay dearly for it. So I developed that mentality, and I don't know if it was on my own or through my pitching coach. At that time, it was John Racanelli, who was an All-American pitcher and, made it up to AAA before an arm injury. He was a great pitching coach. Of course, Bill Bordley stepped up there, and he was a pitching coach one year. So you get a little bit of I call it a big league attitude that I had to develop very quickly, because I was thrown into the mix with really little or no preparation to do it.
Phil, did you develop any new pitches, or did you work on something that became a better pitch when you were in college than what you could throw in high school?
In high school, I was fastball curveball.
Okay.
I was a fastball that sank and ran pretty well, and I was able to paint the black of the plate against lefties and jam the right-handers that would turn on it, but they couldn't put it in the field of play because of the movement I had. But I always had the Sutton curveball. It was a Don Sutton, one finger up, one knuckle up curveball. And the benefit to that pitch is you threw it like a fastball. You didn't have to crank your elbow to get the torque on the ball. It came right out of your hand that way. And I would literally, when I first started pitching, especially in the Pac-10, as a right-hander, if I had a right-handed hitter up, I aimed for his head. That was my aiming point, not a catcher's glove, for his head. And it would break so sharply that I would cut low and out, breaking out of the zone or even middle. I wasn't afraid to throw it down the middle. It moved so much, it was tough to hit. So the reason I mentioned that is not any arrogance, but that was my out pitch.
Sure.
And I had the nerve to throw it full count, which, that's a little, ballsy to be able to do. But if you have confidence in that pitch, and that's the pitch you have in your mind you want to throw, you're going to throw it pretty well if you believe in it.
Well, and as you said just a moment ago, you're literally throwing a ball. You're throwing it at a batter's head, a right-handed batter. So when it comes out of your hand, a batter's going, I'm not swinging at this. There's no way. And then it just creeps over the plate, either inside corner or right down the middle. Middle. It doesn't matter. And that's one of your go-to pitches for obvious reasons. And you didn't throw that in high school. Is that correct? So that was something you developed when you were at school?
I had a pitching coach at he was the head coach at Canyon High, and a guy named Wally Hammond. He was a left-handed pitcher in the Braves organization, and he said, "Why don't you try this?" Because I had a fastball and that was it, and it moved, but that's all I had, and I didn't really know how to throw a changeup. And every time I had thrown up until that point in high school, I really wasn't facing, the really significant talent, so I got away with it. So he taught me that, and I played around with it. So that's why I think he started me that first game of CIF playoffs against Inglewood, and I was already dealing it pretty well at that time. Not with the confidence level and the accuracy that I had in college, but one of the things I did, and my personal claim to fame, although really nobody knows it, is I struck Barry Bonds out every time I faced him.
Come
And
on.
that's at Arizona State and up in Alaska. I was on a crappy 4th place team out of 6 teams, but when we played the Alaska Gold Panthers, which was the championship team, I struck him out there, and Odemy McDowell and a bunch of they had a really stacked team. And so, I had to escort him across Dodger Stadium field from the first base dugout to the center parking lot. He was catching a ride. He didn't ride with the team bus. And you know how bad I wanted to tell him, "Hey, remember me? I struck your ass out every time." But, of course I didn't do it. He was a bona fide big leaguer.
No kidding. Yeah. That's pretty fun. What a great tale that will be for grandchildren and then way beyond. And I'm glad you shared that with us. You talk a little bit about cockiness and being a Trojan, and earlier, just you could rag on other guys back then, and it was a completely different game the way it was played verbally. But the mental aspect of that, and you're in school, you met your girlfriend who eventually became your wife your sophomore year of high school. So there were other things that were distractions for you. What were some of the things that you go, "Oh my gosh, if it wasn't for this, I could have been an All-American"? And was there anything in particular that kind of kept you a distraction, or something that you look back at and go, if I had only done this a little bit better, if I had worked out in the weight room a little bit harder, if I had studied with my catcher? You mentioned Jim Tricchini in the importance of working with him. Anything in particular that would have got you to the next level?
When you're just playing one sport and you've played multiple sports your whole life until you step onto that college field, the off season, you don't quite know what to do because you had that other sport you always did. And so I didn't, I was young and I didn't have much body fat on me. I was in shape, but I didn't.
Sorry, I might have lost you there for a second.
Keep going, Phil.
Or myself.
Guy, he had those rubber tubes that he stretched all the time, and to strengthen his arm and his shoulder. And I didn't do any of that. I just kind of used what talent I had. And I would say, maybe Steve knows because he watched me pitch, I was probably equivalent to a pretty solid AA pitcher. But to make it to that next level, I would have had to evolve much more and work with much more of a work ethic off season and during the year. I mean, for us, off season meant, going to the bar with our buddies and hanging out, and avoiding studying, which we always needed to do, and then cram and take your exams. So if I would have taken school a little more seriously, if I would have taken conditioning and working out and staying strong more seriously, I think I could have definitely played the game a lot longer than I actually did.
Well, Phil, you mentioned that you felt that you were at the AA level, and I think I'd probably agree with that. But I'll tell you something. The Pacific 10 Conference at that time was unquestionably the best conference in college baseball. SC was still a major power. UCLA was very strong. Arizona State was ridiculously good. Stanford was ridiculously good. U of A was very strong. And then you also played, I want to get a little bit into your experience in Alaska. You played for the North Pole Knicks. Your coach was Mike Gillespie, who went on to become a legendary Hall of Fame coach of the USC Trojans, leading the team to the 1998 College World Series title. Your catcher was another mutual friend of ours, Chad Kruder. And Chad met Mike Gillespie's daughter during that summer, and they were married, and they have a family with children to this day. And Chad went on to a long career. I mean, my gosh, he was playing in the big leagues longer than Mark McGwire. I mean, he was still playing into the early 2000s, 2003 or 4, something like that. So why don't you talk about this amazing experience of playing baseball in the Alaska Summer League, some of the other teams you played, I guess it was Kenai, Fairbanks, Anchorage, Mike Gillespie, who's, I think, just an underrated baseball coach just because he followed Rod Dato. I mean, other than that, he's one of the greatest coaches who ever lived. But, it took a long time for him to get out from Coach Dato's shadow. So talk a little bit about Alaska.
So, Gillespie had come out and watched me throw against Cal Berkeley at Dato Field. And I came in at that time. That was before I had that Arizona start. I went out and I came out and I went out, I think it was the 4th inning, and I ended up shutting him out all the way through 9. And I didn't even know he was there, but he called me to go up to Alaska. I was already set to play for Goodman Sporting Goods, Ed Panick's team in LA in the summer. And so I said, why not? Why not? So I went up there, and, the team was horrible. That was his first year. He inherited some players. He was late in recruiting guys. And, he really made the most of us. I mean, we were a 6th place team out of 6 teams if it wasn't for his coaching. Now, what was different for me was I was used to a coach that when he made a decision, he made a decision. But, he wasn't calling pitches. He wasn't putting the steal sign on and hitting and running. We just went out and hit the ball harder and farther than the other teams we played against. That was the kind of the Dato way. Now, he would have augmented or altered his game plan and strategy if we were struggling and not performing. He would get more into the manufacture of runs, but that didn't happen a whole lot. So now I get up there for Gillespie. He's calling every pitch. I just led USC in wins 2 weeks before. I closed the season out leading the team. And I go out there and I got this guy calling my pitches. They didn't even call my pitches at SC. So I shook off the catcher a lot. And I know that frustrated Gillespie, but I was winning. I ended up going 7-2 on the 4th place team. The number 1 pitcher that year was Joe McGrain, who pitched with the Angels and I think St. Louis, and he was 8-3. So percentage-wise, I was a little better. He's on the 1st place team. I'm on the 4th. So Gillespie, after a couple of games, allowed me to shake the catcher off, and before that it was he put down a 2, and I shook it off, and the catcher looks over the dugout, puts down a 2. I'd shake him off. So I'd shake him off the same pitch 3 times in a row before catcher just goes, well, I'm going to relent and let him throw the fastball or whatever. But I was successful. If I failed, then I would have been in purgatory with Gillespie. But he took me out of 1 game the whole time. I had 2nd and 3rd with 1 out and a guy who hit me pretty well. And so I pitched around him a little bit and I walked him. And Gillespie came out and said, I'm making a change. And I go, whoa. I go, I was setting that hitter up because this next guy I own, and I got this. And the whole season up there, I'd gotten any jams I was in, I got out of. I was pitching great. And he goes, I said, I'm making a change. And I said, well, I don't like it. And I walked off the mound. He goes, we'll talk later. And he went to go ream me after the game for challenging his authority and everything. I said, hey, look, I just finished playing 3 years for an old man. He'd come out and say, how do you feel? And I would give him an honest assessment. And if he believed in me, he'd leave me in, and I got out of it. I expected that. And when you said I'm still making a change, I felt like I wasn't being heard. I'm not a junior college pitcher that's pitching for you up here and getting lit up half the time. I'm a successful Pac-10 pitcher that's being successful on a not so great team. And so he, it was one-on-one. So he backed it down. He says, you're right. I played for Rod. I'm a much different coach, much more hands-on guy. He's calling steals. He's calling hit and runs. He's doing everything he can to manufacture runs. So he was the opposite of Rod, but I've never played for a guy that was more in tune with the game. And I think the one thing that he did that I didn't care for was he argued with umpires over balls and strikes. And he would really push it to where he was right on the threshold of getting thrown out. And Rod was a diplomat. He never got, he never got thrown out. He went out there and he made his point to try to get the next call. And he was strategic. Gillespie we wanted that call. And so that was kind of a different thing for me to see, but a great coach.
What about Chad Kruder? What can you say about him?
Chad was probably the best receiver I had ever thrown to. Setting up hitters. He really framed the ball well. It got you some calls. Very good at blocking. Bad wild pitches. And he didn't hit so well. He was a very average hitter, but boy, could that guy catch. And that's that. When he played his 12, 13 plus years in the big leagues, it was as a defensive catcher, without a doubt.
Well, there's no doubt about that. It's funny about Chad. He was the man in the picture. I called him the Forrest Gump of baseball. Nolan Ryan gets his 5,000th career strikeout. Chad Kruder is the catcher. Nolan Ryan gets his 7th career no-hitter. Chad Kruder is the catcher. Someone steals his glove in right field in the bullpen at Wrigley Field. Chad Kruder is in headlines. The cover of my book, Barry Bonds' Baseball Superman, shows Barry Bonds, who you struck out every time you faced him, hitting his 73rd home run of the 2001 season against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Chad Kruder is the catcher. So, yeah, he was definitely a guy. I think he improved as a hitter, but he was definitely a guy who was there to play defense. Yeah, that's Chad catching as Barry Bonds hits his 73rd homer. I think it was off a knuckleball pitcher. You can see it. You can look at his glove. It's like, oh my God, this ball is not going to make it to my glove.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's like his Bonds is up there. It's the last game of the season. He's just going to park it. That's exactly what Barry did. But yeah, Chad was a very interesting. I always got along with him in the later years when I was with Reed Zebra or with the San Francisco Examiner. And Chad would help me get interviews with players, sometimes cantankerous players who didn't want to talk to the press. But right. Chad would say, no, this guy's okay. So good relationship with Chad. And I know that you enjoyed playing with him. And I think you're completely right about your assessment or in your discussion of your conversation with Mike Gillespie. He was a hard nose, but he would listen, and he could be made to understand your point. I think he probably appreciated and respected the fact that you stood up for yourself. And then he said, I played for Rod myself, I understand that's his style. I have a different style, but he obviously respected you standing up for yourself.
Yeah, and that next guy that came in to pitch for me gave up like a triple off the wall, and that was one of my 2 losses.
Oh,
so I kind of proved myself right there.
That's terrible.
Oh well.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, Phil, you'd mentioned a little bit earlier about that knuckle curve type of pitch that you developed. That was kind of a Don Sutton pitch that your high school coach had mentioned might be an additional arrow to put in your quiver to add to your arsenal. Were there any other pitches that you thought of throwing? I mean, there's a slurve now, and sweepers, and split fingers, and all that. Did you experiment much with your pitching, or did you say, I'm a 2, 3, 4 pitch at the most, and I'm just going to develop those? Or were you always open to learn something new?
I was always open to learn, but I had like a double jointed wrist. So when I pitched, the way it came out of my hand is what gave it that natural sink and run inside to the right-handed hitters. So for me to try to throw another angle with that, I struggled. I tried a splitter. We had a kind of a backup guy that didn't play a whole lot, Dr. Mark Schultz, and Schultz threw a splitter, and he worked with me on it a little, and I just didn't feel confident enough with it. Sometimes, I mean, that thing would drop right out of the strike zone, and it was great, but sometimes it would just hang and stay up and get crushed. So I didn't have a lot of confidence, so I never put it in play. I did develop a slider, which was more of just a cut fastball. It didn't move, but maybe 4 inches, 5 inches. But if I got that out on the outside corner to a right-hander, he's going to swing at it. It's just going to creep out of the zone. And so I developed a confidence in that pitch that I would throw, and it helped mix things up a little bit, because then I could bust a guy in with the fastball. He might be leaning over the plate a little bit, and then I always had that curveball in my arsenal to put him away.
Sure.
So,
did you begin watching pitchers differently when you were watching big league games or watching other pitchers at the Pac-10 level when you're going against them? You've got one day where you're pitching, then you've got a couple days off. Would you study what other people would do?
I learned to do that. I never paid attention. I felt like even if a right-handed hitter's strength was the inside fastball, I still felt confident that I could run it in on him enough that he might crush it, but it's going to be foul, and that just sets up my other pitches. So I really started paying attention when I became a starter. That I said I've got to go longer in the game. And I gotta learn a little bit about the strategy of setting up hitters, maybe not to my strengths, but to their weakness. And so I became a student of the game, and I really started to learn by I asked Dato, can I go up in the stands and chart these hitters? Because I want to see them from behind the plate. I didn't want to see them from the first base dugout. And he said, yeah. And so I did. So I did become a student of the game, and I did learn quite a bit. There was something I saw that I liked, but I just didn't think that could be an attribute to my arsenal because of my makeup, physically or whatever,
I would think that even
rows. But unfortunately, I didn't have the 90. Here.
Phil, we're having a little technical difficulties again. When you moved your camera, we lost it. If you can hear me,
try it. It wouldn't work.
Okay, yeah. We got it back again. Thank you.
Yeah, you glitched out for a second. I got it started back up. Yeah, so just to kind of repeat, I didn't have the kind of stuff like Tom Seaver. I would have loved. I saw pitchers that had that fastball about halfway to the plate just exploded in rows, and just a dominant pitch. I would have loved to have that in my arsenal, but I didn't have the 95 plus. So what's that?
I said, who wouldn't?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I learned to respect that. I love the way Nolan Ryan stood on that mound with that intimidating look, those huge thighs, and that focused attention, and just that ornery look that he owned the place. And, you put that fear in a hitter with that physical size. Because, I mean, you look at him when he was at the Mets, he was a beanpole. He was skinny. But that's a guy that worked and worked and worked. And that's why he had the longevity that he did. And so I loved seeing that. And I wish that I would have had that. Maybe that work ethic would have bumped me up to the next level a little bit higher.
There's one of your teammates, we've mentioned him briefly, but we haven't gotten into in depth, and that's Mark McGuire, Big Mac. and you saw him up close and personal for 3 years. Talk about Mark McGwire.
Big Mac, he was a funny guy. I mean, he's kind of like the straight guy in a comedy act. He wasn't a knee slapping, guy, but he had a sense of humor. And I remember the day he stepped onto campus, onto the field, we're all doing the who's who. I was first team all CIF. Well, I was an All-American. I was this, I was that. And we got around to talking football, and he said, I played football at Damien. And we all collectively said, tight end, did you get any scholarship offers? And he's like, no, I at Damien, I was the punter. At 6'4", 225, 230 pounds. I'm like, you're joking, right? He was dead serious. He golfed, so he gets to SC. He's a first baseman and a pitcher. And the starting first baseman was Dave Smith, my older brother, Mark's freshman year. And my brother's in his 4th year as a starter. There's no way in the world McGuire's going to unseat my brother. So he did play a little bit of third. He did okay. And he pitched a little bit. His fastball he had some velocity, but it didn't have a ton of movement on it. But, when you look at a prospect or somebody that you could work with, he had everything to be a good pitcher at the professional level. But it just never came to fruition because, my brother left after his senior year. Big Mac stepped up. My brother tied the record for home runs at SC with 17. McGuire, his sophomore year, started and hit 19. And that was unheard of. And then his junior year, he had 32. I mean, he almost doubled the record where he was an All-American and he was, I think, College Player of the Year. He was the best big guy hitter I'd ever seen. And I mean that because he had bat speed that most big guys didn't have. You see a big guy like that step up to the plate as a right-handed pitcher, you're going to jam him because he's probably going to have, not the quickest, fastest bat speed to get around on the ball. Big Mac could. He did. And, and if you hung it, he made you pay for it as well. So he was, years before any scandalous issues was the best college hitter I ever saw. And, years later, when he chose the route to use steroids, to me, all that did was shorten his career. And he would have played longer, maybe not had the spiking high stats, but he would have ended up with as many or more career home runs and better health, I personally feel. But it takes a pure hitter to say that steroids made the hitter. I disagree. You've got to be a pure hitter. You look at guys, Rafael Palmeiro, Barry Bonds, all these guys were pure hitters that all they did was bounce back a little quicker and they got a little bigger and a little stronger.
Well, do you think that the what I call it, the greed or the desire to hit a ball 450 feet or 500 in that range consistently and get the big payday because of that, contractually meant more than just being able to, Hank Aaron, I'm teasing, but every home run I ever saw of Hank Aaron just barely cleared the fence. Somebody would have jumped as high as they could, and if it's at the 370 mark, his ball went 377. It wasn't a towering second deck, deep tier ESPN highlight type home run, but it was a home run nonetheless. 755. It worked.
You look at the launch angle we hear about now. We didn't hear of that in the early 2000s. Launch angle. What is that? I mean, that's guys that want to hit it bigger and farther than ever. And because that's what gets the likes. That's what the fans want to see. It's explosive. And so that's why when you had the home run race with Sosa and McGuire and Bonds was up there too, people were showing up 3 to 4 hours before game time just to see these guys take batting practice. They kind of, in a Babe Ruth type of fashion, turned that game back into America's pastime. And so I think we don't give them enough credit for that. And now these kids now that are playing Major League Baseball, I think in some form or fashion without the roids, they're trying to emulate those guys because that's what gets the looks. And that's what, the walk-off home run that you hit 450 feet That's all great. I am a guy, as a pitcher, I want runs. I want that first guy on. I want to move him over. I want to, hit the ball deep for a sac fly, whatever it takes to manufacture runs. Even though I played for Rod Dato, who liked the long ball and lived by the long ball, I always saw that the good pitching beats good hitting every day of the week. It really does. So with that thought in mind, let's do all we can to put runs on the board. Just peck away. And then you're going to have your big innings as well when your power hitters get up. But now these guys, they strike out, pop up with a man on third more times than not because they're trying to hit a bomb. I love guys that try to hit bombs off of me because you can't hit a pitch that's on the black and moving. You can't hit that out, not in fair territory. So again, good pitching beats good hitting.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of good pitching, and I agree with you in my humble opinion, and I think you agree, Mark McGwire was the best college baseball player I've ever seen. And then we have Randy Johnson, little bit different story. He wasn't a great college pitcher. He was a big gangling guy. He had incredible potential. The potential was no question, but he had not been a big star in high school. He was kind of discovered by Rod Dato. He was a project. Talk about the big unit.
So, I mean, I was part of the recruitment of him when he came up for a visit, and we took him out and everything. And I remember he said, one of his passions was photography. And, Rod had just walked by and he says, Tiger, best photography school in the country. I don't think we even had a photography major there. But, that was Rod. And so we got Randy, and he came out there, and he threw relatively hard. But, he didn't have much of a breaking ball. And so he was probably 25 to 35% of the pitcher he later became, which at the college level is enough to win, obviously. But he is a guy that I always said you're only as good as your ability to improve from that high school to college to pros. And he proved that, I think, better than anybody I ever played with because he got consistently better. And then one day it all clicked and then he became unhittable. And so what we found, and this is an anecdotal thing that's kind of funny, so you guys will probably like it, was we found if we could get a rise out of Randy, his fastball jumped up to about 8 to 10 miles an hour. So we found a way to get him pissed off and mad. And so at times he hated us, but we would embarrass him. We would make fun of him. We would do some things a little more subtly. And then he'd get pissed, and all of a sudden he's throwing 95 and just hitters are just walking back to the dugout. So you had to get him motivated. Obviously, once he made it to the big leagues, and really evolved and developed into that pitcher, he became so competitive, he got himself up. And you could see that dynamo, that charged, threatening, scary look that he had. And he did not have that in college at all. This is something that developed, and it's because he evolved and became that good.
You got me mentally thinking there are times in Seattle, obviously with other teams that he played with, Arizona, et cetera, where you can almost see him talking to himself. Yes. And really like cussing himself out and getting angry to the point where I don't care who this guy is. I don't care who he is. He could be, it could be my mother. I'm still going to strike her out. You know what I mean? Just a real competitive, fiery, this is my business. This is my world. And guess what? I'm holding the ball. And I'm going to get this guy out. I appreciate you sharing that because I can envision, maybe not the same. I don't know what it's like from a college perspective, but I do remember close-ups where the glove is right underneath his eye level, and he's talking to himself. And John Kruk sure had a hard time in the All-Star game. He didn't want to do anything with that.
He wanted no part of him.
Nope.
And Phil, there was another player that the talent was just incredible. But you had a catcher, Jack Del Rio. And in my opinion, Jack Del Rio had the ability to be a major league all-star baseball player. Do you agree with that? And give me some memories of pitching to Jack Del Rio?
So Del Rio fundamentally did a lot of things wrong, but his exceptional talent overrode that. He had some of the worst swings I've ever seen and would hit a one-hop double off the wall. He would do everything wrong, but he was so physically talented, and you know, he was a good receiver behind the plate because he was so big he could just get down and block the ball, and he wasn't afraid to get hurt back there. And I wish I had a video of this guy on second base. There was a single to center field. We had an All-American outfielder named John Wallace. Steve, if you remember him, just an exceptional ball player. From Fresno. He came up and threw like a one-hop from center field to the plate. Del Rio was standing, you know, blocking the plate, and this guy had 180 feet of steam going, and he hit a brick wall. He just hit him and fell down, and Del Rio just stood there, didn't knock him back 1 inch, and he kind of looked down at the guy and then dropped the ball and walked to the dugout. It was the third out. And, you know, so there were times that, you know, he was just so physically strong that he could get away with not having the best fundamentals. So to answer your question, without a doubt, if he only played baseball, see, football was his primary sport. That got his attention. He came out to play baseball to help the team out. If he was playing solely baseball and worked on those fundamentals and continued to get bigger and stronger like he did in the NFL, I have no doubt that he had the ability to become an all-star type caliber player in the big leagues. But we'll never know. He was too good at football.
I played against him a couple of years in the NFL myself. You know, he was a Cowboy for a while, and then with the Vikings, just a, you know, steady guy, and then a real smart, a thinker too. So I think maybe there's a little bit of that. I'm going to help you throw the best pitches you possibly can, the combination to keep guys off, that certainly spilled over into the way that he would think as a player, and then eventually as a defensive coordinator, and then obviously as a head coach and back as a defense coordinator again. Tremendous career with the National Football League. So all the best to Jack. And again, all these teammates that you have. If you don't mind, Phil, you said your brothers, you know, when you were growing up, who were some of the heroes that you mentioned Don Sutton for a pitch. Were there other guys when you were a kid that you go, I wish I played like him? Were you a Mike Schmidt guy or a Reggie Jackson guy growing up? What were the idols in your mind's eye, guys that you really wanted to emulate your game after?
So I was a Dodger fan, kind of born and bred. You know, they'd have Little League Day at Dodger Stadium. We'd all put our little uniforms on and go out onto the field. I was hooked, and I've been a lifelong Dodger fan. So when I talk about MLB, I'm a National League guy. I don't follow the American League that much, a little here and there. So when I was getting recruited by, you know, scouts and talked to, they said I reminded them of Doug DeCinces, and I'm thinking, I think he's an Angels third baseman.
Yeah. He was with the Orioles, wasn't he? Yeah, that guy. What? Yeah, what?
Yeah, he actually followed Brooks Robinson.
Of course, yeah.
Later played for the California Angels.
Doug had an amazing career, Steven. Lifelong, you know, third baseman.
Okay, there we go.
Go ahead. Come on back.
Yeah, you were talking about Doug DeCinces.
Yeah, so I'm back with you. Sorry. Yeah, so I really didn't know much about him, but I kind of liked him because, hey, he's a big leaguer. And if I reminded somebody of him, that's great for me. But of course, Mike Schmidt, George Brett. I was kind of more concentrated on third baseman more than any other position. I always respected the pitchers because I, you know, pitched a little bit in those early formative years. But I was a Dodger guy, man. That, you know, Garvey, Say, Lopes, and Russell. I mean, even though, you know, you can't say Davey Lopes was the best second baseman in baseball, he wasn't. And Russell wasn't the best shortstop in baseball. Ron Say was pretty competitive, and Garvey obviously was pretty competitive to be up near the top tier. But they were Dodgers, and those were the guys that I watched. And, you know, it's not like having Spectrum now and seeing every home game, and if you can't, you find it online. You know, we had to go to the ballpark to see the games. So that was my access because my dad was a baseball dad, and he didn't mind. We didn't care that he worked all day and it might be Friday and a long week. My dad never said no to his boys, and he was not the little league dad that sat there and yelled at you to do this and that. He understood that you're in high school now. Your parents should have nothing to say. Even in little league, your parents should have nothing to say. Let the coaches coach you. And so, I think I grew up learning to play the game right. You hit a home run, you put your head down, you run the bases. You don't flip the bat. That would get you, the next hitter would be a little upset with you because he'd be taking one in the ribs. And, so I don't like all this hot dog style of play now. And, guys say you're old, get over it. Yeah, they're right. I am older. I'm in my 60s now. But I don't have to like it. And Rod Dato was a class act. You never showed up the other team. You went out and you beat them. That was it. Or you lost. And that was it. And there's always tomorrow. But I don't really like kind of the direction the game's gone as far as all the hot dogging. And, we had Jeffrey Leonard back in the day that would drop the flap or whatever he called it. And I thought that was pretty arrogant for the time. And I'm sure a few Giants got nailed for that activity. But I still love the game. The game is still the game. I don't like the pitch count. I don't necessarily like them reviewing pitches. And, there were times I knew it was a strike on the mound and I didn't get the call. You just come back at them, So kind of the world according to Phil there, unfortunately,
Well, take me back a little bit further. Thank you for bringing up your dad and that you did. Do you remember your first Dodger game and what it was like? You mentioned the hot dogging and all that. What was a Dodger dog like the first? For me, it was smelling the grass, knowing that it had just been cut, getting there while they're taking the crab down and batting practice is basically over. The game's going to start soon. Helen Dell and the Dodger organ that was in the left field scoreboard that would say charge when you got it was so many different things that were so cool as a youngster about this is what big league baseball is like. And Dodger Stadium, obviously third oldest park in the major leagues. What a tradition there. What was that like for you, your first game? Do you remember?
Yeah, late 60s, probably 68 or 69. Went there with my brothers and I couldn't believe how green the grass was and how it looked like you couldn't get a bad hop because, we had a guy that, was a groundskeeper that came out and rode the mower on our baseball field. And that was about it. They hooked a Cushman cart up to a drag and dragged the infield. And that was about it. You got bad hops. You had to deal with it. So playing on Dodger Stadium field, which I was able to do a couple of times was really special. But in those formative years, just seeing the enormity, the stands with all the people, the grass, the concessions, it was just such an eye opener that really helped me fall in love with the game.
It's a beautiful stadium and getting a chance to visit with your brothers and all that kind of stuff. Did you ever think, man, I would love to play in right field where Willie Crawford was, or Reggie Smith, or the Toy Cannon, Jimmy Wynn was in center, or Dusty Baker, obviously Bill Buckner had played quite a bit. A very interesting and eclectic lineup at that time. Dodgers were kind of at the end of the 60s run with Koufax and Drysdale. They were kind of trying to find their way. They go to the World Series in 74, but, the tradition and the amount of people that go to the games, that didn't waver at all.
Right. Yeah, it was a time where, I remember my dad was president of Little League, of Canyon Country Little League. And so when we went on the field, he got my brother Keith, the shortstop, was actually a catcher at the time in Little League. And he got a Joe Ferguson autographed picture. And then my other brother Dave was a pitcher first baseman. He got a Tommy John signed photo, and I can't remember who I got. I think it might have been, who was it in the early 70s? Billy Grabarkowitz or some name like that.
He was my favorite player for the 1, 2, or 2 years that he was there. Keep going.
Yeah. So those were neat times and being on the field. And then the first time actually on the field as a first team all CIF player, we got on the field to get our little awards, and they were playing the Padres. And the first guy that I see is a Padre named Dave Winfield. Again, I'm back to the Anthony Munoz thing. Is this the size of these guys? This is ridiculous. He was huge, and then little did I know that 2 years later, I'd be the starting third baseman against the Dodgers. I hit off a Dave Stewart. I hit off a Jerry Royce. Then I hit off a AAA guy named Orozco. It wasn't Jesse Orozco, it was some other guy. And I was 1 for 3 with a one-hop double off the left center wall. So my lifetime Dodger batting average is .333. I'm going to leave it at that.
Hall of Famer. Yeah, that's all you need, right? You hit above 300, you can get the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Well, all the great memories and all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic. And then obviously talk a little bit more about, once your time at SC ends, your senior year, that the candle is burning out on your eligibility from a collegiate perspective. Degree, taking advantage of the school, so to speak, instead of it taking advantage of you. Was there a great process for you in terms of your time at SC?
It's very strange because, I ended up hurting my shoulder, and it really, I didn't like the game for a little while. But Rod offered me the head coaching job of the JV team, and he would pay my tuition. Wow. So I got that 5th year of tuition, which was huge because, my money ran out.
Yep.
And so that was something that Rod did for me. Now, he understood that I ended up becoming a student of the game, and that I thought about coaching. So I ended up going the next 2 years after coaching the JV team and finishing school. I was the pitching coach at Glendale Junior College, and that taught me that coaching wasn't for me. Guys in the dugout, grab ass and talking about going to the party, who's sleeping with who. Our game at SC was the game, and we had plenty of time to talk about that stuff after the game. Yeah. But we were serious, and to be around players that didn't take the game as seriously as I did was very frustrating. So I said, the heck with that, and I went to something that I'd always kind of thought about doing, but didn't right away, and that was I applied to the LAPD, kind of like SC. I thought they were the best police department in the country. I grew up on Adam 12 and Dragnet. So I walked in, I just took the test cold, passed, got hired, and spent 31 years there. So that was kind of my trajectory in life.
Well, congratulations on that. Yeah, I know going through the process of just becoming a police officer and learning how to do it the right way, very difficult process. And then obviously making split-second decisions. 31 years. Again, congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. You're welcome.
Very welcome. And Steven, obviously, there's more baseball to discuss. Obviously, you've got other the Alaska and other experiences. Please go.
Well, but I also know that you did, Phil. I mean, you had your career with the LAP. You did a lot of stuff. You did some I don't want you to get into tradecraft, but you did some undercover. You got a master's degree from USC through the LAPD. You became a commander in the LAPD. You became a pilot of helicopters, Rolling Thunder, in the LAPD. So you really did it all in the Los Angeles Police Department. It would seem to me, if someone is a historian of the LAPD or just a rookie or just someone who wants to understand the culture, and we're talking about before OJ, we're going all the way back to Chief Gates and then those years and then beyond that. You lived through all of that. Someone could do a lot worse than to ask you and really do a sort of an oral history of the Los Angeles Police Department from the mid 80s to present. You'd be the guy to talk about it, correct?
Yeah, well, being a baseball player, you're a competitor, and you have to have that competitive edge as a police officer to stay on your game and utilize the utmost in officer safety, because it's all about going home at the end of the shift. But like in baseball, I was a player first and a coach after. I wanted to be a real police officer. I wanted to work the streets. I had the SC education. I had the ability to promote right away and as fast as I wanted to, and I did not. I wanted to learn the craft, as it were. I wanted to learn the job. So I worked the streets. I became a field training officer, which we call like a two-striper, a corporal. I did that for a while. I worked undercover vice for a couple years. I made sergeant pretty young on the job, and that was because of my USC education. I worked 2 different gang units, which is kind of an elite position for patrol officers to go into gangs.
I certainly want to thank Phil Smith for being a guest on Take 5 with Steven Travers. It's been a trip down memory lane. We've had some glitches here, but we managed to get most of Phil's memories and a lot of different questions asked.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Phil, for being a part of the show here today. I learned so much about your specific background. And who would have thunk it, Steven, that neither one of us knew that he had struck out Barry Bonds every time that he faced him?
I did not know that. I was going to ask about playing against Barry. I did not know. I knew Phil was very successful. I knew he pitched very well against both Arizona teams, but I didn't remember that he was knocked out Barry Bonds the way he did. And not only that at USC, but when they were in Alaska. So that's very impressive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and his connection with some of the other greats in baseball history, obviously Rod Dedeaux, the Mike Gillespie connection that he had when he was in Alaska there, and even just learning something as simple as a kind of a curveball with one knuckle up, and it's just, you throw it as a fastball, but that was Don Sutton's pitch. His brothers got Tommy John's autograph, and he got Billy Grabarkowitz, and I would have paid for Billy, but
here comes Billy Grabarkowitz.
Billy Grabarkowitz, number 1. He wore number 1 also, along with Dedeaux. But we want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Phil Smith has been our special guest. Phil is a part of the USC tradition, a great pitcher there at the University of Southern California. Started as a third baseman and mentioned so many of the greats part of USC in the late 70s and the early 80s. We thank him for that. Steven, I want to say thank you too also for bringing Phil on and having him be a part of the show. Folks, this has been Take 5 with Steven Travers. We want to thank you for watching. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. If you like the show, please like or subscribe and let us know what you feel in terms of just getting in contact with us and letting us know how you enjoyed the show. In the meanwhile, I just want to say thank you to everybody for tuning in. I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for being a part of 100 Yards of Football. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, guys.